Jayvardy.
Jayvardy.
This Jayvardy.
Jayvardy. Thank you, Jayvardy.
Jayvardy.
Jayvardy. Oh, Jayvardy! Oh my gosh.
Hello everybody and welcome to Vlogmas day number 5. It is December 5th, 2021, and today is going to be a little bit differently. I'm going to be doing this by voice only. I'm not going to appear on camera. And yeah, does that count as a Vlogmas video? Because, you know, the whole point of a vlog is you show up on camera. But technically this is a video, technically this is a log. I'm going to count it. I've done tons of vlogs in my life anyways, so it's not like I'm afraid to show up on camera or something. I'm just, to be honest with you, I'm kind of naked right now. I'm like, you know, upper body is got a shirt on, but lower body is rocking the birthday suit here. So we're not going to show up on camera. Besides, I don't really think I need to, because for today's video I want to keep things quick, I want to keep things simple, and I came up with an alphabetical list of my 30 favorite movies. Now I have the definition of favorite brought up here because I think when people do a favorites list rather than a best list, the internet mixes those two words up, and I am doing a favorites list, not a best list. This is not, in my opinion, the 30 best movies of all time. There are, you know, I would say probably over half this list wouldn't even be like in the discussion for the 30 best movies of all time. But this is my favorite list. And the definition of favorite is a person or thing that is especially popular or particularly well liked by someone, something that is preferred by all others of the same kind by an individual. So that is the definition of favorite. That is what I'm doing. And remember, my favorite list is going to be completely different from your favorite list. And just because these are my 30 favorite movies does not mean I think these are the 30 best movies of all time, because that would be a completely different discussion altogether. Now, my challenge today is to give just quick thoughts on all 30 of these movies. And, you know, I'm going to talk about the first time I remember watching them, and just kind of go from there. I'm going to give very quick thoughts. I don't have time to do a review of all 30 of these movies, and especially with how much I talk in these videos, we'd be here literally all night if that was the case. Also, this list is done in alphabetical order. I didn't want to overthink, you know, ranking them from 30 to 1. So instead, I'm just going to go alphabetically from A to the last movie actually starts with a number. So A to a numerical title. So let's go. Kicking off the list of the 30 favorite movies. The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, The Amazing Spider-Man I, of course, saw in theaters for the first time. I went with a group of friends. There was 4 of us that went, plus my sister, I believe, came as well. Or I might be mixing it up with the sequel. I know she went with us to the sequel, but I know for sure it was a group of 4 of us. There was a group of 4 friends I had that included myself that went to go see like all of the big movies basically from like 2011 to 2013 before I went to college. Peter Parker is my favorite Peter Parker in The Amazing Spider-Man as opposed to all the rest of the Spider-Man movies. I thought Andrew Garfield did a great job, and you know, I've watched The Amazing Spider-Man probably like 20 times on Blu-ray since I've gotten it. And I'm a big TASM defender, big Andrew Garfield defender. The Amazing Spider-Man is definitely my favorite Spider-Man movie, and I saw the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man in theaters too when I was 11 years old. So, and it was a good analogy that the first Spider-Man was a good Spider-Man for 11-year-old me, but this Spider-Man was a good Spider-Man for 21-year-old me. And basically from that point on until now, because it's still my favorite. Next on the list is The Aviator, which in my opinion is the best Martin Scorsese movie, and it's the best Leonardo DiCaprio movie. The Aviator is fun. You know, some people say it's slow. I don't really think it's slow. I actually think they go out of their way to make sure the movie isn't slow, and that they keep things interesting, and especially with the character interactions. But it's a good biopic. It's probably one of the better biopics out there. It's not 100% truthful to the life of Howard Hughes, but it did a really good job representing him. My first time watching this was actually on DVD. My girlfriend and I at the time, it was my very first serious girlfriend. I was kind of on like a movie collecting binge at that point in my life. So I was just like buying like, lots of DVDs, and we randomly bought The Aviator. I hadn't seen it at that point. We watched it and we loved it. And I must have been 17, 18, 19 years old at the time. I wasn't even in my 20s, let's say that. Um, but like I said, I think The Aviator was Leonardo DiCaprio's best performance he's given. And I've seen the vast majority of Leonardo DiCaprio movies. He should have won an Oscar for The Aviator. He lost out to Jamie Foxx that year, I believe, but he should have won the Oscar that year. That was the best performance he gave. Next on the list is Back to the Future. I can't remember the very first time I watched Back to the Future, because it was definitely when I was very young. Definitely the family watched it when I was very, very young. But my first real memory with Back to the Future is when my parents were still together. So it wasn't too long before they got divorced, but my parents were still together. My sister and brother, well, like my brother obviously was alive. He's only 2 years younger than me. But my sister was alive, and the four of them went to like a family birthday party on my mom's side or something like that. And it was something that kept them out for like hours and hours of the day. But I was really sick that day, so I stayed home. It was one of the first times I was ever left home alone in my life, and I must have been like 14, 13 or 14. And when I mean left alone, I mean left alone for like a day. Like I was home for probably like 12, 13 hours alone that day. That was probably the first time in my life that's ever happened. Um, but the Back to the Future trilogy was on TV, and it was the first time I watched all three movies back to back, and it was the first time I ever saw part three. I had only seen the first two parts before that, and it was a long time before I saw the movies when that trilogy got played on TV. That's my first memory of the trilogy, but for this list, I'm focusing on the first movie, Back to the Future, one of the all-time classics. Of all the movies on this list, this is definitely one that would be considered for a top 30 best movies of all time. Also, um, Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, probably the best on-screen chemistry between actors of all time. Next on the list for me is Batman Forever. Batman Forever was a movie that I watched millions of times as a kid. I was a huge Batman fan. This movie came out when I was like 5, 6 years old. I saw it a bunch. Um, I actually never liked Batman and Robin. Even as a kid, I really didn't like Batman and Robin. As a kid in the 90s, I still didn't like that movie, which goes to show I was a pretty smart movie fan even as a kid. But um, I loved the crap out of Batman Forever, and still to this day, when I watch it, it gives me feelings of like watching it when I was a kid. Admittedly, it's a bit of a harder watch nowadays. I have given it a watch in the last few years, but simply for the amount of times I watched it as a kid, I gotta have Batman Forever in this list. Next on the list is going to be Batman v Superman. This for me was like a comic book dream come true. And the extended director's cut of Batman v Superman is actually really, really good. As much as people, are divided on the theatrical edition, I'm on the side of loves it. But I admit that the extended director's cut is actually a superior movie. Um, but yeah, Batman v Superman, seeing Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman in the same movie finally, it took them like way too long to get that done, but they finally did, and I was on the side of loved it. So Batman v Superman is in this list for me. Coming up next, I'm going to go with The Bourne Identity. The first time I watched The Bourne Identity was on TV. It's one of those movies that when you had cable in Canada, like The Bourne Identity was one of those movies that got played all the time. and I loved it. I always loved The Bourne Identity. And then, I went out and got the trilogy on DVD, and I remember watching the whole trilogy with my dad, and I hadn't seen The Bourne Ultimatum yet. When I did that, again, I had a DVD that I hadn't even seen, the movie yet. And we were on the edge of our seats at the end of The Bourne Ultimatum to see whether Jason Bourne lived or died. I'm not going to give a spoiler on the answer to that. If you've seen the movies, you know, but um, The Bourne Identity for me is my favorite of the three. I actually think Matt Damon has a better lock on the character in the next two movies, but like he kind of plays himself a little bit in The Bourne Identity, where in The Bourne Supremacy and Bourne Ultimatum, he actually has a lock on the character. But I just like, the mystery of The Bourne Identity better than the like chase of the sequels, because the sequels is essentially Bourne running away. There is still a bit of the puzzle that he's putting together, but I just love that, like, putting the puzzle together of The Bourne Identity. And the ending of The Bourne Identity is really, really good. It's definitely in my top 30 favorite movies of all time. Number seven, it's not number seven, it's just the alphabetical. Number seven is Breakfast Club. The Breakfast Club obviously is like the generation above me, Generation X. It's like all the different, teenage personalities of Generation X are represented in the Breakfast Club. And then you have the baby boomer, midlife crisis teacher who is supervising their detention. So it's a really good generational study of Generation X and the baby boomer generation, and how those two generations interacted as adults and teens. I'm a millennial, but my parents are actually Gen X. I'm like one of the, like, my parents are basically like the oldest Generation X possible, but they are Generation X, and they had me relatively young. So generally, most millennials actually have baby boomer parents, but I actually have Generation X parents. Um, but this was a movie that they obviously loved, and they passed it on to me, and it was a movie I watched quite a bit as a teenager, and before I was a teenager, because I think I was like probably like 11 when I first watched Breakfast Club, but the amount of times I've seen it is too many to count, so it's going in this list. Next for me is Catch Me If You Can. This was the movie that made me like Leonardo DiCaprio. Before this movie, I didn't really like him, to be completely honest. My first memory of watching this movie was actually in school. Um, it was one of the first years of high school. One of the teachers played it one day, because every teacher has days where they don't feel like working and they just play movies. And the first time I saw this movie was actually in high school, in class. And I thought it was amazing. I really liked it. I ended up going out and buying it on DVD, and that's what started my fandom of Leonardo DiCaprio, because before this movie, I had only seen him in The Beach and Titanic, and I hated both those movies, and I thought he was a hack, but I was very, very wrong about that. He's actually a really good actor. Next on the list for me is Clerks. This was a movie my younger brother discovered, and then we got really into Kevin Smith and the whole View Askew universe afterwards. But my younger brother was the one who discovered Clerks, and my first memory of watching it was him and I staying up like really, really late after our parents got divorced, and we were both living with our dad. Um, and we stayed up really, really late. My mom was like a really controlling parent, where my dad was like a really not give a shit parent. So it was like we went from living a really sheltered life when they were together, because my mom was like definitely the alpha parent, and my dad always just went along with what she wanted. But when they got divorced and we moved in with my dad, my brother and I had like a lot more freedom. And one of the things we started doing was we would stay up really, really late at night to watch movies when my dad went to bed, and he knew we were up. We weren't being sneaky. He knew we were up. And then we'd skip school the next day. Like, we'd sleep through school the next day. It was a lot of fun. We did that quite often, where we would stay up till like 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning, go to bed, and then he'd try to wake us up at like 8 a.m. to go to school, and we'd like refuse to get out of bed. Anyways, one of those times was Clerks. That's my first memory of watching it. We ended up showing it to a bunch of our friends. They all loved it too. Clerks, one of the greatest indie movies of all time. Next on the list is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the David Fincher version. David Fincher is probably my favorite director right now. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I have seen the Swedish version. I actually did see the Swedish version before I saw the American version. I saw the Swedish version when I was dating my very first girlfriend. We dated for 3.5 years, me and my first girlfriend. I don't want to say her name in this video, but we dated for 3.5 years. We started dating when I was 17, and we broke up just before I was 21. Um, but she read the books, so she wanted to watch the Swedish version of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, so her parents rented it. They were still doing DVD rentals at the time. It wasn't like those were being phased out. Like it wasn't that long ago. But it was like in like the dying days of DVD rentals. I think they, those DVD vending machine rental places. I think they got it from one of those. If you live in Canada, you know what I'm talking about. There's like these red DVD like vending machines that you'd rent DVDs and then you'd go take it back to the machine after. This was like long after Blockbuster had closed. I think those things might have even been run by Netflix. But anyways, that's how I saw the Swedish version. And then when the American version came out years later, I remember liking the Swedish version. So I went to go see the American version. And coincidentally, it was probably like a few months after my girlfriend and I had broken up. So I ended up going to see this alone. And I remember actually like emailing her to tell her like, hey, I saw like the American version and it was really good. And like I said, David Fincher, he's one of my favorites. There's a couple other Fincher movies on this list. But Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I have it on DVD and Blu-ray. I'm a big fan of it. Next on the list is The Godfather. The Godfather is a movie that I was really, really late to the game on. I didn't see The Godfather until I went to film school. I went to like 4 years of film school in college. Um, that's what I studied, was film and television production. And you can't be in film school and not have The Godfather come up, and you also can't be in film school or the film industry really and not have seen The Godfather. It's like really like not allowed. Like it's like an unwritten rule, like you have to have seen The Godfather. um, but I actually know a couple people in the film industry, like young people, like in their early 20s, that haven't seen The Godfather, and I'm on their case about like making them see it because they need to. But I was late to the game with The Godfather. I didn't see it probably until my mid 20s. Um, and it's one of the greatest movies of all time. I've seen it a handful of times now. I've probably seen it like I'd say 7 or 8 times now, and that was after going the majority of my life without seeing it. So I was late to the game on The Godfather, but it's an all-time great, and it's in my top 30 favorite movies of all time. Number 12 is Gone Girl. Me and my most recent girlfriend went to go see this movie in the theaters as a date because it was kind of marketed as like a gruesome like date movie. Um, for couples, and if you've seen the movie you kind of get why. Like it's a really fun couples movie, and just about like how like couples make each other crazy. And the girl that I saw this movie with was a girl I was living with, so we had a lot of fun with it. We watched it a bunch of times on DVD as well afterwards. We both loved it. But yeah, Gone Girl for me, another Fincher movie. Ben Affleck's great in it, and it's in this list. Speaking of Ben Affleck, the movie that he co-wrote is next on this list, Good Will Hunting, one of my all-time favorite movies ever. And this is another movie that my younger brother discovered and showed to me. Um, and it's funny that there's two movies on this list that like it went that way, because I'm actually the bigger movie fan between me and my brother. But he again discovered this movie. He showed it to me. It was similar story to how we watched Clerks. We stayed up really late and watched this movie, and I loved it. I've seen it like probably like 100 times. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I've seen it a bunch of times since. It's one of the movies that inspired me to go to film school, to be completely honest. And Matt Damon is a fantastic actor. I think some of his more modern work, it's not up to par as to some of the earlier stuff in his career, in my opinion. But Good Will Hunting to me is still the best Matt Damon performance like ever. And again, I think it's unfortunate that he didn't win an Oscar for that movie. He did win an Oscar for screenwriting that movie, and that's very well deserved because it is one of the greatest scripts ever. If you haven't had a chance to read the script of Good Will Hunting, if that's something you're into, I highly suggest it because the script is just as good as the movie is. So if you get a chance to look up the script for Good Will Hunting and you can get your eyes on it, I would highly recommend you do so. Next on the list is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The Last Crusade is my favorite Indiana Jones movie of the four. And it was a long, long time ago that I saw this movie for the first time. Um, when I was a kid growing up, and when I say kid, I mean like 7, 8 years old, like literally below 10. We had our house, and then we had a trailer up like 2 hours away, 2 to 3 hours away from our house that we'd spend a lot of our summers at. But the point is, we had like movies on VHS at the house, and then another collection of movies on VHS that were kept at the trailer. The Indiana Jones trilogy was kept at the trailer, and we watched all three a few times at the trailer because we would spend like weeks at a time there in the summer times. And for me, to this day, my favorite when I was a kid was actually the Temple of Doom, because I think the Temple of Doom, because of Short Round, is more attractive for kids. But for me at my age now, my favorite of the Indiana Jones movies is The Last Crusade, and it's the one that I put on this list. Next for me is Joker. Joaquin Phoenix was amazing. This movie, while it was doing something new and something original with Joker that we've never seen before, it was actually very highly accurate to the Batman lore. And they did a lot of things to go out of their way to, be consistent with the story that they were telling, but also be respectful to the Batman lore. And I, as a big Batman fan, appreciate that. The biggest takeaway for me as a Batman fan watching this movie was I understand now why the Joker will never kill Batman, and that's because his goal of making him laugh. He's already met Bruce Wayne, and he failed to make him laugh. So for the rest of time, he's going to have the goal of making Bruce Wayne laugh, and thus making the Batman laugh. And he's never going to be able to. And until he is able to, he will not kill the Batman. Um, but outside of that, that's just my Batman nerdiness coming out. But outside of that, I thought the movie was phenomenal. It was probably one of the best modern movies that I've seen in years. And I consider like anything above like 2014 to be a modern movie, and The Joker is probably the best modern movie um, that I've seen. Like from 2014 beyond, The Joker for me is the best movie. And it was, even though I saw it by myself, it was still one of the most fun movies I've ever seen. Number 16 for me is The Karate Kid. It's a family classic. It's a children's classic. We talked about actor chemistry from Back to the Future, but Mr. Miyagi and Daniel-san have some of the best actor chemistry of all time as well. And I think much like the Back to the Future sequels, which are higher quality than the Karate Kid sequels, I think both series sequels benefited from their two lead actors having amazing chemistry, and it gave life to those movies beyond their original film. But for me, The Karate Kid it's an all-time classic. It's a lot of fun. It still holds up, which is it's hard for movies like from the 80s to still hold up like into the modern era. Um, especially movies about teenagers, like because teen culture from like decade to decade changes so much, but um, there's something about Daniel that makes him very, very relatable to, I think, you know, teenagers of all generations. Um, and you know what? Every time I watch The Karate Kid, all I can think of is if that movie was like made today, he would make a great Spider-Man. The kid who played Daniel would have made a really, really good Spider-Man. I have not seen, the Cobra Kai spin-off series. I haven't seen any of that. I've heard it's really good. I'm happy that all those guys got to work again. That's fantastic. But for me, of that series on this list, I'm putting the original Karate Kid. Next on the list is Lethal Weapon. Lethal Weapon, again, it's one of those movies that, my parents had a massive movie collection and they had all the Lethal Weapons on VHS, but I never watched it. I didn't watch it until I was older, when they played. It's one of those movies that, again, got played a lot on cable in Canada, and that's how I saw the first movie, and I ended up going out and collecting um, all four on DVD. But it was a box set. Like I bought the DVD collection all in one case, and then me and my girlfriend at the time went through the whole series. The Lethal Weapon sequels are, they're kind of meh, but the first Lethal Weapon is one of the better cop movies ever, and for me, it's going on this list. Next for me is Man of Steel, which is my favorite Superman movie. Man of Steel is actually one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. I originally saw it with that group of four friends that I mentioned going to see the Amazing Spider-Man with, and I just remember like Man of Steel is a very divisive movie, and I remember even the four of us were very divisive amongst each other. None of us disliked the movie, but two of us really, really loved it. I was one of the two, and then the other two were like, it was good, but it's not as great as you guys are saying. And I think that's very common with a lot of Zack Snyder movies. They're very divisive, but the people that love them, and the people that get them. And for Man of Steel, I was one of the ones that got it. It was a lot of fun watching it and debating about it with my group of four friends. And for me, Man of Steel is in my 30 favorites. Um, so yeah, moving on to the next one is The Mighty Ducks, which, similar to Batman Forever, um, is that it's a movie I watched like 1,000 times as a kid. I live in Canada. I played hockey growing up, both recreationally in leagues, but also like I played ice hockey in leagues. But I also spent like tons of my time playing street hockey with neighboring kids, and shooting pucks um, into my hockey net in my driveway. It was the number one activity I did when I was at home was play hockey outside, and it's the sport that, of all the sports I played in leagues, and I've played volleyball in leagues, I've played soccer in leagues, I've played basketball in leagues, and I've played hockey and baseball in leagues. I grew most of the time it was hockey and soccer, but I've spent at least 1 year playing all five of those sports in a league or for my school. Volleyball being the team I represented my school at multiple times. The Mighty Ducks was my favorite movie as a kid, and opposite of Batman Forever, which is a bit of a tough watch for me nowadays, The Mighty Ducks is still a beautiful watch for me, even to this day. Whenever I watch it, it just fills me with happiness, is the best way to explain it. I don't remember the first time I've seen it because pretty much, it feels like this movie's been with me my entire life. And the movie came out in 1992, I believe, and I was born in 1990, so in a way, it probably has been with me my whole life. So there you go. Next for me is Night at the Roxbury. First time I ever saw this movie was at a sleepover birthday party when I was very, very young. I must have been in grade 2 or 3 because it was before I moved. It was in the very first house I grew up at. A kid from my school invited me, who lived on my block, invited me and 3 other boys to sleep over at his house for a birthday party. And I remember I was like a last second invite. Like what happened basically is like he invited the two others, or yeah, I think there was four of us in total. So he invited the two other boys, and they like bumped into me, and then the mom like invited me to go with them, and because like the kids wanted me to come with them, and then my mom approved me to go. It was like a last second thing for me, but I ended up sleeping over at his house, and we watched two movies that night. The two movies were Night at the Roxbury and Look Who's Talking, that movie with the babies that like can speak out loud. I don't know if people have like I haven't. Well, I don't know if I've even watched Look Who's Talking since that night, but those were the two movies we watched that night at that sleepover. It was probably one of the first sleepovers I ever went to as a kid. Um, and Night at the Roxbury was a movie that just like all of us boys loved, even though we were probably too young to even understand the jokes in that movie. Because yeah, I still watch Night at the Roxbury like once a year. And yeah, I was definitely too young to watch it when I first watched it because, like I said, I was like 6 or 7 years old at the time. But Night at the Roxbury was another one of those movies that got played on cable almost like if you had cable in Canada, Night at the Roxbury is probably on like 4 or 5 times a year. Um, so that's how I watched it mostly, but I did end up collecting it on DVD eventually. Next on this list is Pirates of the Caribbean, the first Pirates of the Caribbean. I first saw the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, um, one summer when I was at my grandfather's house. So my grandfather lived with his wife on the beach, and me and my brother would go up and spend like a week to 10 days there, like every year. Um, that grandfather of mine is still alive, actually. Like, I'm 31 years old, and I'm turning 31 years old, I should say, and he's still alive. Him and his wife are still alive. Um, but anyways, they used to invite us up to when I was a teenager. They would invite us to their house, or when I was like a preteen. I think this movie came out in 2003, if I remember correctly. It might have been 2002. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Um, his wife took us to see the movie is the point, and it was a movie my brother and I didn't even know existed, but she took us to see it because it came out that summer, and my brother and I loved it. We thought it was one of the best movies, and it was such a nice surprise because I didn't know it was a movie that was coming out. um, but we saw it and I loved it, and um, still to this day the first Pirates is definitely the best Pirates. There's 5 Pirates of the Caribbean movies now in total, and none of them even come close to being as good as the first one. So there you go. Number 22 for me is Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction I saw for the first time with my dad and brother after my parents' divorce. My dad decided, my brother and I were old enough to see Pulp Fiction, so he showed it to us. And it's just a cool movie, man. Like, it's literally the definition of cool, and it's ironic because I remember just thinking just how cool this movie was, and I'm pretty sure Kevin Smith described Pulp Fiction as like a cool movie on his podcast as well. When he was talking about like the definition of cool movies, he mentioned Pulp Fiction as like the definition, which is like ironic. But yeah, Pulp Fiction, one of the all-time greats. Again, this is a list of my favorite 30, but if this was a list of the 30 best movies of all time, Pulp Fiction would almost certainly be in that list. For most people, it's a top 10 best movie of all time. So, there's a few movies on this list that would definitely be in consideration for the top 30 movies of all time. Just glancing at it, Back to the Future would be in there. Breakfast Club might be in there. Godfather certainly would be in there. Good Will Hunting might be in there. The Last Crusade wouldn't be in there, but Raiders of the Lost Ark would be. Pulp Fiction would be. And then there's a couple movies yet to come that would be in the consideration as well. But yeah, Pulp Fiction. I loved it. Next for me is Star Trek, and that's the J.J. Abrams Star Trek. And the thing about this movie is it got me back into Star Trek. I was a really, really big Star Trek fan as a kid. Again, at my dad and mom's trailer, we had like a bunch of Star Trek movies there. Like, that's where we kept them. And I used to watch the Next Generation TV show with my dad growing up. Um, that show was in syndication in Canada, like probably still to this day it's in syndication. I just don't have cable anymore, so like I don't know, but um, we used to watch The Next Generation together. Um, but The Next Generation ended in the 90s, its TV run. And, for the longest while, like after, you watched it on TV so many times, you start to get older and you move on to other things. And that's what happened with me at Star Trek. But Star Trek, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie, not only did I love it as an individual movie when it came out, it got me back into the swing of things, and I'm the biggest Star Trek fan I know now. I have all 13 films on DVD or Blu-ray. I have the entire original series television series on DVD or Blu-ray. I have the entire Next Generation TV series on Blu-ray. I have the entire Deep Space Nine series on DVD. I have the entire Voyager TV series on DVD. And I have Star Trek Picard also on Blu-ray and DVD. So, I've pretty much got all of Star Trek that isn't Star Trek Enterprise or Star Trek Discovery. Maybe I'll get Enterprise eventually, but yeah, I'm the biggest Star Trek fan I know, and Star Trek J.J. Abrams got me into it. But speaking of, next on the list is Star Trek Wrath of Khan, which is my favorite Star Trek movie of all time. Um, it's simply the best Star Trek movie of all time. And for me, Wrath of Khan isn't just the best Star Trek movie of all time, it's maybe the best Star Trek story on screen of all time, including every single television episode. And there are a crap ton of TV episodes. I believe it's over 800 now. Of all the movies and TV series, I believe it is over 800 stories on screen now. And for me, Wrath of Khan is, like I said, it's not just the best Star Trek movie, but it's up there for the best Star Trek story of all time, period. I accidentally went out of order a bit because I skipped one, but we're going to talk about it now before we get to the Star Wars movies. And the one I skipped was Spider-Man 2. I don't have anything to say about Spider-Man 2 because actually yesterday's Vlogmas video was like in-depth hour-long review of Spider-Man 2. So if you want to hear me talk about Spider-Man 2, go watch Vlogmas Day 4 because everything that needs to be said was said in that. The only thing I have to say now is Spider-Man 2 is in my top 30 favorite movies of all time. Star Wars A New Hope and Star Wars Empire Strikes Back are the next two. The first time I ever saw Star Wars A New Hope was I was at my babysitter's, so I must have been in like grade 1. And every day after school, we would go to my babysitter's house until my parents picked us up about 2 hours after, like they worked till a certain time. So we would go to the babysitter's house after school for about 2 hours, and then my parents would pick us up, me and my brother. And then there were other kids that went to this house as well. But one day they were playing Star Wars A New Hope, and I got to watching it, but I ended up playing with the other kids. But like I kept like kind of running back and forth between playing with the kids and watching the movie. My parents had all three Star Wars movies because keep in mind I'm born in 1990. All three Star Wars movies are long out at this time. The prequels didn't exist yet. I saw all of the prequels in theaters, by the way, like originally in theaters. But so my parents found out that I was kind of watching it. So they sat me and my brother down that same weekend to show us the trilogy. But my first introduction was like kind of glancing at parts of it while like running back and forth playing with kids at my babysitters, and then obviously Empire Strikes Back. When my parents showed me and my brother the trilogy that weekend, that was the first time I saw Empire Strikes Back. But Star Wars A New Hope, Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, they are two movies that would almost certainly both be up in consideration for the top 30 best of all time. This is not a best list, this is my favorite list. They're good enough to both be in my top 30 favorites of all time, and they are two of the all-time greatest films ever made, period. What else is there to say about them? Next on the list, and we're down to the last three, I want to wrap this up before 40 minutes, so I'm going to go quick here, is Wolf of Wall Street. It's the last great movie Leonardo DiCaprio made, in my opinion. He was great in it. Jonah Hill was great. I've watched it a bunch of times on DVD and Blu-ray. First time I ever saw it was in theaters by myself. It's one of the few movies I've actually gone to the theaters to see by myself in my life. Not the first, because I did see Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by myself in theaters as well. But there's a handful of movies I've seen by myself in theaters. Wolf of Wall Street was one of them. Loved it then, love it now. I watch it on DVD or Blu-ray like probably once a year. Next up is Young Guns. Young Guns was a movie that my parents had collected. When I hit a certain age, they allowed me to watch it. They knew I loved Emilio Estevez because I was a big, huge ass Mighty Ducks fan. And I remember when the year finally came where they let me watch Young Guns, I loved it. I love the sequel too. I actually think the sequel is a better movie. It's more historically accurate to Billy the Kid. But Young Guns for me, the first one is the one I like better, even though I think the sequel is actually a better made movie. But yeah, Young Guns, loved it. Huge Emilio Estevez fan between The Mighty Ducks, The Breakfast Club, and Young Guns. He's one of my all-time favorite actors, and Young Guns was one of my favorite movies of all time. And last on this list, it's not last if I did a ranking, but in numerical alphabetical order, it's last, and that's 8 Mile. I was a big Eminem fan at the time this movie came out, and this movie only made me a bigger fan. That being said, that's my 30 favorite movies of all time. Thank you for watching.